Welcome to START Secondary Transition Team PACE Resources and Training. This key component is on integrated competitive employment. I am Kelly Rogers. This is section 4 of a 4-section series on strategies and conditions for employment. We're going to cover the top 3 strategies that are important to consider when you're developing supports for an employment setting, including visual supports, self-management systems, and natural supports or peer-to-peer support in the workplace. So let's start with visual supports. Why visual supports? We talked in section 2 about the student's predisposition. They have predispositions for visual processing, for challenges with theory of mind or perspective taking, and making faulty associations. And so those 3 predispositions lend themselves to the power of visual supports. In addition to that need for order and predictability, visual schedules and visual supports help layer in that predictability in what sometimes is an unpredictable environment. And most importantly, navigating a visual schedule and using visuals to help understand the world around us is a skill, not just a strategy. Heck, look at your phone anymore. I mean, you're using all icons. They're visuals to tell us what that thing is and what that tool is and how to use it. And so this allows us then to embed some of those other predispositions for high interest areas. And people will say all the time, well, he doesn't need the schedule, like he knows the schedule, but knowing the schedule isn't the only reason we're using visual schedules and visual supports. We're using them to help augment some of those other predispositions. So it becomes what we might call a non-negotiable. Having a visual schedule and using other visual supports is just a non-negotiable for the vast majority of individuals on the autism spectrum. So we really talk about this master visual schedule as being the one non-negotiable. If nothing else, if other visuals aren't needed, at a minimum, we should be using a master visual schedule because it allows the individual to get used to using a visual system. So if we do need it in the future, we don't have to reteach this skill. So when we talk about the master visual schedules, one of the benefits of it is it really gets we just talked about predispositions in section 2 and individuals with autism having a challenging time taking on the perspectives of other people. And so, and yet the employer has an internal script of what they expect the individual to do in terms of work. And some of it, we just expect people to know. We don't write it down. We don't tell them that they have to do it in a certain way or how to do it. And some of us pick that up by, again, reading the social cues that are really challenging for some individuals with autism. So this is an opportunity to get that entire internal script into something in a third point, on a concrete place, that the individual with autism then, who is the employee, knows what's expected. So from clock in to clock out, including breaks in big areas of task expectations, that would go on that master schedule. And the big point is it needs to be used at every transition. So clock in, we cross that off or put it in the done pile, and we're on to input new customers, and now we go to do that task. That master visual schedule may be the only visual support that's needed. That could be true. For many individuals, they will need more than that. And so you start with that master schedule and then only add more when it's indicated. And how do you know if it's indicated? Well, if the individual is not independent in doing the tasks that are on that schedule, if they're not engaged in doing them, or they're presenting with some sort of challenges about it, that might be an indication to first start with adding visuals and see if that will correct the issue. So this is an example of what it might look like to have mini schedules or steps within schedules. So clock in may not need enough detail. The student may not be being successful independently from bus to clocking in. And so we add that detail. We're going to get off the bus, enter from the back door, go to the staff room, clock in, and then we're done with that. And again, I really encourage teams, especially in the early phases, that we're crossing off each one of these mini items as we go. After a while, once the student gets used to those 4, maybe you can move off of that and just check the done when the whole clock in routine is complete. But to teach it well, you really want to get crossing that off at each step along the way. Same thing with any of the work tasks. Oftentimes those big work tasks have, multiple moving parts and steps and tasks within them. And so you go down the line and make this as detailed as is necessary for the student, the individual, to be independent and engaged in the expectations. This is another opportunity when we talked about interest areas, high interest areas, and how those might interfere with success in these areas, is the visual schedule allows you to use our strategy of not know, but where and when. So it's not no, we're going to take this thing that you value away from you. It's about we're going to teach where and when it's appropriate to do it or use it. And that may be in a number of ways. It might be that their interest area we can embed, it might be part of the work that we embed within the entire day. It also may be that we do the not, know, where, and when, where we put in time. So the 15-minute break might be an opportunity to engage in your preferred activity. We might have to embed it more frequently than that, given how intense that interest area may be. But the schedule is a perfect tool for teaching individuals how to manage their really intense interests. And then we can move the schedule in and out, again, depending on how much detail individuals need. That was moving it in, and we can get as detailed as necessary moving it in, but we may need to move it out as well. That at home, they may need to know, is this a day I'm going to work or not going to work? And so again, we all have these, but it's just being intentional about going to it every day. And if you have an individual who asks, wants to get that predictability by asking, am I going to work today? Am I going to work today? Am I going to work today? Then we can get in the habit of saying, well, check your schedule, and let that schedule become the powerful thing that it can be by prompting to it. Go check your schedule. What's it say? Are you on or off today? So that again, these kinds of systems, like visual systems, help individuals be independent, not people dependent. And then from there, again, anytime that you're giving a verbal instruction that the student is either not processing or not responding to, that's an opportunity to use additional visuals. Write it down. So we kind of have this mantra: write it down, write it down, write it down, write it down, write it down. If you say it the first time, that's instruction. We want to reserve our words for instruction, but everything we do after to prompt what's expected, we want to be in a visual way. And so write it down is a perfect one. I'll have folks say, well, he doesn't read. And so my response always to that is, whether or not we know if he reads, we're still going to write it down. We're going to take it to a third point. We can still say it while we're pointing to that third point, but individuals can learn that though they might not read fluently or at expected level, they can learn that these 4 letters mean this is what I'm supposed to be doing. They can learn that the words SCHE, means schedule, that I'm supposed to check my schedule. They can definitely make that association. And so we're going to use that to their advantage in processing. And again, we talked about those executive functioning challenges that some individuals have. And so writing it down gives them an opportunity to sort of process what's being said in a less cognitive way than trying to listen and process. And in addition to that, we can use visuals to help just really outline what the expectations are. When it's very difficult for you to pick up the nuances, the social nuances of what's expected, the look, or somebody, responding a certain way in your environment, you're not picking up on those cues, then some of those, what we might call soft skills, are really challenging. And frankly, in the research, these are the things that get more in the way of successful employment than the actual job skill itself. And so this is an example just of an expectations matrix where, what are the big 3 expectations in these different areas of our employment setting, and really sometimes making posters of these and having them in those environments as reminders is really helpful as well. And the interesting thing is, these are just examples of visual supports in the workplace, but these were not necessarily visual supports that were put in place for individuals with autism. And what we find as we're working with individuals with autism in employment setting is the employer is saying, well, this is going to help out all our employees. This is going to make us more efficient. So if you go back to some of those previous sections where we talked about some of the research that's happened in this area, where having a diverse workforce makes us all better, makes us all more efficient, makes us have a culture of support and positiveness. And so there are many ways that visuals are currently being used. Start looking them in your own work environment, looking for those visual supports, and where you would appreciate even additional visuals to help know, what am I supposed to do in this particular environment or at this particular time? And so it shouldn't be new news as we're embedding visual supports. It may just be more and different visual supports for individuals with autism. So there's just a litany of other ways that we can add visual supports, from using visual timers, creating organizational systems that increase efficiency, which again will help everyone, not just the individual with autism. Having transition visuals, that when there are going to be transitions for kids who need those cues, having those embedded. Using, check your list or check your schedule redirections visually. Using social narratives, which is really just laying out, word for word or step by step how certain social expectations happen. So it might be lunchtime routines, how that works, and writing that out so they have an understanding of that. So it could go on and on. This is even the short list, but one that we do want to highlight is the self-management systems. It's probably the second most popular and useful visual system that is effective for individuals with autism. And so again, self-management is really, they're visual systems. They're founded primarily on like the idea of the visual schedule, but it really helps students with autism independently self-regulate and monitor their behavior. So it's a learning tool. It super assists them with hidden curriculum. You would just be shocked, and you guys know that work with students or have children who have autism, how much of the world is built on hidden curriculum, that we just make assumptions about what we should do and we tend to be accurate. And, using these self-management systems allows us to put that hidden curriculum in a concrete place so that we can help individuals with autism know what's expected. And they also help just improve skills, language and communication, social behavior, etc. And so much like visual systems overall being a skill, not just a strategy, self-management as well is both a tool and an important skill in and of itself. And that's why it really is highlighted as support for individuals in employment settings. So the basic components of self-management systems is, one is know what we're teaching. And so depending on what the backdrop is of what the individual is needing to monitor or learn, we're overarchingly teaching them to monitor that, record their own performance, and obtain feedback in some way. Feedback might come from themselves. Yep, I did a great job. Or it might be feedback that they're getting from their supervisor or someone else, to say, hey, I got this completed, I did this accurately. And so there's kind of 4 basic steps when you read the research on self-management systems. One is preparing what the system itself will look like. Many of them are paper pencil type systems, but we've used other things depending on what the individual needs to monitor and what the feasibility is of having a piece of paper there while you're doing that. We teach the student, and better yet, we involve the individual in the development of the system and in using the system for their own learning. And then initially we're implementing it with adult support. And so making sure that it's working for the individual and that it's being successful for them and it's not aversive or negative. And then we really ultimately promote it to be something that they independently use to help monitor their own progress or behavior. So there are many, many types of self-management systems depending on what the presenting challenge is. So are we trying to teach self-awareness? So we have some students who, for example, talk to themselves, make noises and things like that. And again, I want to be careful that this is not about making individuals with autism conform in some way to a particular set of unrealistic expectations. So this is very much done with, not to, individuals. There are some work environments for which making lots of noises might be challenging. And so from the perspective of matching employment environments, for someone who has that behavior, that might not be the match that we would make, unless the individual is like, this is something that I would like to work on, because I do want to work in this environment, so I want to learn this skill. So I want to be careful that this doesn't come across as, trying to fix the person with autism, because that is not it at all. This is working with them to address challenges that they have so that they can be successful in the work environments that they have chosen. And so, again, there's many, many areas of goals that individuals might want to work on for which self-management systems could be utilized. Just so that you guys have an understanding of what they might look like, here's some examples. So, this is just a basic example of a self-management system, and it doesn't even really say what the individual's working on. There's 3 monitoring boxes you can see under the self-management system. And so by the task and by the time of day, they are monitoring their behavior on those 3 things and simply marking those in the box. And so this is what a basic one might look like. And you would just put the skill that, maybe it's that, that you interact with a coworker. Maybe that's really challenging for some individuals, and they want to work on being able to initiate a conversation with a coworker. So during each piece of this time, they mark the box every time they initiated a social interaction. That's kind of the idea of this system. This happened to be just an example of, and it just goes to show when we don't give kids work experiences early enough that it has, the challenges have nothing to do with the work task. This happened to be an individual who had not made money before, and he was well into his 20s when he had his first job, and all of a sudden he's got money, and they've got a vending machine and this, the pop machine. And so he's like, game on. And so he's using all of his money at each of his breaks and lunch and taking everything out of the vending machine. There wasn't anything left for anybody else. And so, again, spending some time talking about the challenge, and again, it's theory of mind, difficulty, taking on the perspective of someone else. And so it's like nobody else has any chance to get a snack. And so again, he wanted to, work on that. So this was his self-management system that every break and lunch he's picking, and they picked a number, 2 snacks and 1 drink or some version of that together. And so that he could mark what his food selection was for that time. It just gave a place for that monitoring, external monitoring, which we know is effective when, for all kinds of behavioral change. This happened to be an example of whether or not this individual would restock the items in patients' rooms. But he was going in when the doctor was in there talking, obviously privately, to the family about things, or would go in when the individual's sleeping and kind of make a lot of noise and kind of some issues like that. So they had to create sort of a self-monitoring system about, here's the expectations of when you can go in a room. And so his self-management system was whether or not he went in the room and which of these things were true when he didn't. He don't enter if the doctor's in the room, don't enter if the door is closed. And here's the interesting thing. Initially they said don't enter if there's a crack in the door, but none of the doors had cracks in them. And that's, again, that a faulty association that a crack in the door literally means a crack in the door, not the door cracked open. And so you'll find yourself in those situations often because of that literal thinking or those faulty associations. This was an example of a self-management tool that had to do with infractions. This individual, obviously, some individuals on the autism spectrum are very rule governed. And so when other people are choosing not to follow the rule, which they may have legitimate reasons, that's very bothersome for some individuals. So this this self-management system was simply an infraction log. And so instead of telling the person you're not following the rule and you need to be fired and all those things that can become challenging in the work environment, he could put that information in the infraction log and share that with the supervisor when needed. So again, we're taking just a very brief overview of the idea of self-management systems. The START website has a whole ton of examples if this is an area that you're going down to help you build self-management systems for individuals. And then finally, our last one is really the idea of natural supports. And this is a shift from what traditionally has been an adult or a job coach strategy to a peer or a co-worker strategy. The idea being is who knows the work environment the best, who knows the culture of the work environment the best than a co-worker. So let's work with co-workers to be supporters of individuals with autism on the job site, rather than have them attached to a job coach and mirror that to, like in school, having a paraprofessional. There are immeasurable benefits of moving to natural supports, and though you still may be using job coaches in the initial phases of getting things set up to model and support coworkers, ultimately what you're looking for is that we're building interdependence. And like mentioned in previous sections, diverse and inclusive work settings benefit us all. And so there's certainly a number of benefits for the individual with autism. This is a win-win for all of us when we build inclusive work settings. And so though this is just an introduction to the idea of utilizing natural supports, know that there are many, many, many resources to help support and build a natural support system in work environments. One of those supports and one of the recommendations that there is that no matter how you're laying that out, that you're having regular meetings with the coworkers with a problem-solving focus so that things don't fester underneath and problems arise. Many people with autism do participate in those, so depending on the individual and their ability to participate in that, we would encourage that, we would want that, but some individuals that's really, really difficult to do. And so we can work on that skill, we can build that skill, but it's absolutely crucial if you're doing natural supports to have an opportunity for them to share how things are going and get ideas for ways to better support their coworker with autism. And that wraps up the section on strategies and supports. Again, this is just a short brush of what is available in terms of resources for you, but at least gives you an introduction to those pieces. So if you would take a minute and jot down some most important points you're taking away, if you haven't already, and I want to thank you so much for your engagement in this session and in this series on employment.